and tonight we're joined by Eman Quotah and Susan Muaddi Darraj in conversation to introduce Eman's debut novel, Bride of the Sea. I want to take a moment to thank First Middle East Institute for their help producing tonight's event, and thank you all for joining us in this virtual format. Despite the current circumstances, we strive to hold events like these to continue introducing you to new and favorite authors and exciting titles. Iman's book, Bride of the Sea, is available for purchase on our website. There will be a link in our chat, so you can go check that out. You can also use our Q&A function to pose questions for tonight's event. For Eman and Susan, our apologies in advance if we don't have time to get to every question. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce tonight's speakers. In conversation with Eman is Susan Muaddi Darraj. She's the author of a short story collection, A Curious Land, Stories from Home, which won the 2016 AWP Grace Paley Prize for Short Fiction, the 2016 Arab American Book Prize, and was shortlisted for the Palestine Book Award. In 2019, she launched the viral hashtag #TweetYourThobe social media campaign to promote Palestinian culture. All right, Susan.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks to Politics and Prose for hosting this event. And I'm just so honored to be here with Eman. I'm going to introduce Eman. I'm going to give you the formal introduction to Eman, and then I'm going to tell you how I know Eman. Eman Quotah grew up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Cleveland, Ohio. Her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, USA Today, The Toast, Book Riot, and other publications. She lives with her family in Washington, D.C. Eman, I'm so honored to be here with you.
Thanks for
And
being here.
congratulations on this book. I wanted to tell everybody how I got to know you, which is that maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I think you won the Independent Artist Prize from the Maryland State Arts Council, and we met actually at the prize event, and I was so excited to see an Arab American name on the awardee list. And we started talking that night, and you were telling me about your writing and the themes that you write about, and I was excited about you back then. So it is it is such a joy to be sitting here, with a copy of your book and to be talking to you at your official book launch. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, I remember connecting with you there, and how great it is to meet other Arab American writers. And I really admire how involved you are in the writing community in Baltimore and DC and around the country, and how supportive you are of other writers, and especially Arab American writers. So it's so exciting to have you with me here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And before I'm going to ask you to read from the book to start us off. But before I do that, I'd like to just ask you to ground us a little bit in the book's background. Can you tell us loosely like what the book is about and how you came up with this idea?
Sure, yeah. So in the book, a young Saudi couple moves to Cleveland, Ohio in the early 1970s. But their marriage falls apart. And after they divorce, the wife fears that her daughter is going to be taken away from her. She wants to stay in the US, and her ex-husband has moved back to Saudi Arabia. So because of Saudi custody law, she's afraid her daughter will be taken away from her. So she stays in Cleveland and kidnaps her own daughter and disappears with her. And the husband is left to search for the daughter. So the book is about that sort of catalyzing event, but then about the reunion of the father and the daughter, and her sort of trying to figure out who she is, learn about this country that she has never been to, after because when she meets her father, she's like a young adult. And the idea for the story came to me because something like this happened to a family friend whose daughter and ex-wife disappeared, and he was separated from his daughter for many years. And then I remember when I was a young adult hearing about he finally found her. And so I started thinking about what would that be like. for both of them. And over the years, it kind of moved from being a story just about that reunion to a bigger story about the way that the ripple effects of that on the three lives of the main characters, which is the mother, the father, and the daughter, and the other people around them.
Because Hanadi, who is the daughter, really goes through, it's almost like she's peeling off layers of identity, like who she really is, and she's trying to figure that out. And I felt so moved by her character. She's a very compelling character. You did a wonderful job developing her. Yeah, it's interesting to hear that this was rooted in something that actually did happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know more of the family story, and I kind of, in a way, didn't want to, because I wanted to, not appropriate their story, but tell a story that was rooted in that true life happening. And I think that there's, on top of sort of some of the dislocation that happens with immigration experiences, there's also the dislocation that happens to people who have experienced parental abduction. And so those things are kind of layered on top of each other. So her experience is very multifaceted and complicated.
And just for the audience, the tradition or the law that you're talking about that would grant the father custody is there's a law about, in the case of divorce, children are returned to the father's full custody at the age of 7. Is that what you're?
I think it's it varies in some different Muslim countries, but in Saudi Arabia, daughters go to their fathers at the age of 7 or 8 because it is, I think, considered to be better for them to be with the mother when they're younger, and then better for them to be with the father when they're older, especially if the mother remarries. And
Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. I when I first got a hold of the book, I thought to myself, good job, Eman, because you're finally writing an answer to that awful movie, Not Without My Daughter. It's like, as an Arab American, every person I meet seems to mention that movie to me. It's like one of the most racist films, I think, made about Muslim Americans, but I'm joking, but I mean, I think that you are providing really like an authentic kind of insider's view of how family policy works and how family dynamics work when a marriage falls apart.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that book was, it was on my mind. I like know about it, and even though that family was in Iran,
right, I know,
part of the Arab world, but yeah, it's sort of this like long shadow. And I actually haven't read it or seen the movie. I've seen,
it's terrible.
I've seen clips from the movie, but yeah, and also like there's so many depictions of Arab and Muslim men that I don't know the truth of that family's experience, right? I'm not gonna, sure. But the depiction is always often this terrible abusive depiction. I just recently saw a quote from one of Leila Chati's poems where it says the news, something like, the news can't believe a daughter who loves her Arab father. And it's kind of heartbreaking, right? But you understand it, right?
Yeah,
and so I'm always like, I think as an Arab, I don't know if you feel this as an Arab American woman writer, that people expect you to write about the female experience. And I'm really drawn to writing about the male Arab and Arab American experience as well, because I think it's really not well depicted in our popular culture and not well understood. Excuse me. And so that's part of why, like, this father's dilemma was so just like, it really drew me.
His heart is breaking throughout the book, and it's it's hard to read his section sometimes because you feel so moved by him. Would you read for us from the book? Would you read a little
Sure.
bit for us? Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you.
And I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book. It's a kind of a prologue, and it's called Basmala, 2018. Hannah dreams the family buries her mother, a woman they haven't seen in more than 40 years. Hannah herself hasn't seen her mom in 20 years. The family buries Sadie in view of the Red Sea, a few miles from Jeddah, where she was born. The water is a perfect, unending slab of turquoise. Hannah focuses on the horizon. The Arabian Peninsula and everything on it disappear. The land behind her, beneath her, beside her. Hannah stands on firm ground. Ahead of her, miles and miles and miles of sea. Before the burial and the sea, Hannah is in a small room with low cushions. Her mother's body lies in the middle of the floor on a sheet spread over a silk rug. Women in mourning white hunch over the body, the sleeves of their long dresses rolled to the elbows. Though she can't see their faces, Hannah knows, the way you sometimes know in dreams, who is touching her mother's lifeless skin. Hannah's grandmother, Aunties Randa and Riham, a handful of female cousins. They wash the hands and face 3 times, the arms, the feet, as though preparing the body for prayer, as though the dead could pray. They slide the washcloth down the body's right side and its left side, press the stomach with their flat palms to force a bowel movement. After they wash the body, they expertly swaddle it in white cotton, as though readying a baby for sleep. All that shows is a pale face, cheeks like crumpled sheets of unbleached paper. The women burn sandalwood incense. In real life, someone would be howling with grief, calling her mother's given name, Saida. They would call Hannah's name too, her other name. Oh, Hanadi, God have mercy on your mother. God forgive her and protect her. In this dream, watery silence, as though they are at the bottom of the sea. Her mother looks harmless, quiet and still, an object. The sea becomes a great brown, expansive lake, a sea again, a lake. Hannah turns from the water. Men in white thobes, brown mishlahs, and white headdresses carry the body, the bundle that is her mother, down a beach that shines like a coin. The body is veiled, disguised. It could be anyone. Maybe it is not her mother. Maybe bodies have been switched. Soon the men, these uncles and cousins, both close and distant, are digging and digging, their thobes hiked up around their waists and tucked into their boxer briefs, their mishlahs and headdresses thrown in a big pile on the sand. Behind the men are waves, and there is sound, a whoosh and crash, and someone cussing, and though Hannah doesn't understand the Arabic words, she recognizes the tone of frustration, like someone stubbing a toe or jolting an elbow. Meanwhile, the men dig, and the sand won't stop filling in, and the cussing continues, and the waves crash. One of the men realizes they forgot to say God's name before they started. That part Hannah understands, a miracle of dream translation. The men put down their shovels. Together, their voices sing-song and thrumming. They say, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate.
Thank you so much for reading that.
Sure.
I was really struck by, and of course I read this, but you know, it always it strikes you differently when the author is reading it. You say that Saida, who's the mother, she looks in death, she looks harmless. And I thought to myself, that's so interesting that you wrote that at the beginning, because she's, of course, she's a very disturbed character, right? How did you develop her character, the mother's character?
Yeah, I would say that was like the hardest character to write because, you know, I can't imagine like doing what she did. Although maybe you can, like you have to, as the writer, you have to try to imagine it. Like, why is she doing it? And you know, what motivates her, and, you know, does she end up regretting her actions? Like, are there, what does she realize the repercussions? And I also, you know, I really wanted to, like, you know, not demonize her, to make her a full human character, while also not, you know, minimizing what she does, because parental abduction is very misunderstood. People think that if someone, a child knows, a parent or other relative takes them, that it's not harmful, but it really is a very traumatic experience for people. Obviously, people experience it in different ways, to different degrees, but for many people, it's a very traumatic experience. So I didn't want to minimize that, but I also wanted to sort of try to show who she is. But also, I think that Hannah and her father, Munir, both have to grapple, like, for the rest of their lives with what Sadie or Saida has done. And so it's sort of, it was hard. So how did, I guess,
she's so complicated, you know.
So complicated. And and I also didn't want to, like, I didn't want to show too much of her, but not too little. And I think in different drafts, like, there was less of her in earlier drafts. And then, you know, it was all Hannah's reflections on her and Munir's reflections on her. So you didn't really, I don't think you saw her as well. So that's why you have those, like, shorter chapters now, from her perspective, to give her perspective, but to keep, she's still kind of a mystery, I think, and keeping the chapters shorter, and sort of, you know, they're sprinkled throughout the years, I think helped me to kind of try to show people glimpses of her.
They felt like photographs. I felt like at one point with her sections, I was flipping through like an old photo album, and I was just seeing her in these different phases of her life, because she, you know, they all changed. The three of them changed: father, mother, and daughter. But, you know, Saida or Sadie changes, I think, more maybe in the most dramatic ways, you know, throughout the book. So yeah, I felt like I was looking at snapshots of her as I was reading through the book. It was a really interesting kind of structure that you gave.
In order to keep her daughter, she chooses to, like, you know, leave her country, leave her family, change her name. And it's really, everything she does is, like, really drastic, you know.
Yeah, she's very dramatic. She likes to be dramatic. Even in the beginning, you know, you can see the marriage is troubled because well, not because, but, you know, part of it is related to the high drama within the household. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Right.
I just want to make a note to folks who are out there. We're already getting some questions in the Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in there. I'm going to get to them in a little bit. I just have a couple more questions to ask Eman. So one of them is, Eman, you talked about, you know, being deliberate, or, you know, really working hard on developing Saida's character. I want to go back to the idea of writing as an Arab American writer. So a lot of Arab American writers who have been published in the last, and there's been a bit of a boom, if we can call it that, in the last maybe, you know, 15 or 20 years. A lot of those writers have been Palestinian, like myself, Lebanese, Egyptian, more Levantine writers. We've not seen a lot of books in English by Saudi writers, Saudi American writers. And I found it interesting because I think American readers and the American public have a very kind of different view of Saudis than they have of maybe more Mediterranean Arabs. So I'm wondering if that worried you, kind of the stereotypes or the beliefs or the ideas that people hold. Like, did that worry you as you were putting this book together, as you were developing your characters and your plot line?
Yeah, you know, I think it took me a long time to write this book, and I think I went through, like, different stages. So, I have always wanted to be a writer, and part of that was my love of books, but also, growing up in Saudi Arabia, in a, mixed culture family. I always wanted to like share Saudi culture with Americans. And so that motivated me a lot. But then, as I got into writing the book and also facing a lot of the barriers that exist in publishing, to publishing stories, any stories really about the Middle East, Islam, Arab characters, like there's a lot of expectations about what kind of story you're going to write. I'm sure as a Palestinian American writer, you have faced that. There are particular issues with writing as a Palestinian writer versus writing as a Saudi American writer. And I feel like at certain points, I got really caught up in it, really caught up in how am I going to show this in a way that people can really see what I see. And after a while, I just sort of was like, I just have to write what, like the people that I knew, like I have come from a really large family in Saudi Arabia. My family, my experiences, like what I know. And, but also I think I've been really inspired in the past 5 to 10 years by a lot of writers in the United States from underrepresented groups, including Arab American writers and poets who are like writing poems with Arabic in them, like writing, and saying this book is for young gay Black men. I didn't write it for anybody else,
I love that. Isn't it great?
It's so wonderful to see. And I wish that I had that, like, when I was younger, to say, I'm going to write this for my Saudi American friends who I grew up with in Jeddah, that's who I'm writing it for first. Not that I'm not writing it for anybody else. Anybody who wants to read my book, I want them to read my book,
Right.
But we, we haven't had those things for us, that represent us, that represent the childhood that we had. And to talk about how people see, like in the United States, see Saudi women, I want to tell a couple of stories. So one is, and this one is kind of, it's sort of has something to do with my book. Actually, both a little bit do. One is, so this month was the 30th anniversary of Operation Desert Storm. And I was a senior in a high school in Jeddah at that time. During Operation Desert Shield, there were some women in Riyadh who drove at the time. Women were not allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. And it was the first, I think, public organized protest of women not being able to drive. And people always talk about it when you read about, histories of it now, as like the women they saw, American women coming to Saudi Arabia in the U.S. military. They were allowed to drive, right, as members of the U.S. military. So these women felt like, why can't we drive? So you can see that in a couple of ways. You could see it as, hang on, I'm gonna.
Yeah. No, I remember hearing that spin on it. Yeah.
Right. You could see it as like women looking up to American women as sort of the image of freedom, right? That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is the agency of the Saudi women in pointing out the hypocrisy of their society.
Yeah.
Like, how come those women are allowed to be free, but we're not? We should be allowed to be free too. And that's sort of, to me, what I want to point out is that the agency of those women, no matter what kind of oppression that they do face, that they have agency. And it's not a story about, them looking up to American women. So the second, Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to add, excuse me for interrupting you, but it's not that feminism has been like imported into Saudi Arabia. You know, like the Arab women's feminist movement is a very old movement. It goes back to the late 1800s in
Right.
Egypt and other
In
parts of the
Egypt,
Middle
yeah.
East. So right,
Right.
so it's a very old movement. It's not been imported by any means. Right.
Right. And conversations about women's place in society had happened for many years in Arab countries. And so the second story is more recent. So, fast forward 25 years, Saudi government in 2017 announces that women will get the right to drive. And the spokeswoman for the Saudi embassy at the time was a woman, and she actually was the sister of a friend of mine. And I saw her speaking to an American newscaster about this change and about other laws that, still hadn't been changed in Saudi Arabia. And she was trying to talk about her own experience living alone in Riyadh, being a single woman there. And the newscaster, the American newscaster, who I remember as being blonde, I don't know if she really was, but she was like, she kept pushing back. She didn't want to hear it. And eventually she just goes, but I care about women. And I was like, it's not so you can't even listen to the Saudi woman telling her own story, which is one story. There are many Saudi women stories, but you can't even listen to that without centering yourself. I care about women, and that, again, it's the same thing of whose story is it? Who's allowed to be the hero of the story? And so I think when I recast it that way, as instead of and the way that many, artists are doing now, instead of how do I counter these stereotypes? It was how do I center these experiences? How do I center the people who I'm writing about? And, a real inspiration for one of the characters was my grandma, who, Jiddati, who was,
Is she Munir's mother? I love Munir's mother.
Halima is very, she's not exactly my grandma, but she's very inspired by my grandma. My grandma she had 12 kids. She was a child bride. She never went to school. She never learned to read or write. And, I suppose I wish that she had had an education and those opportunities, but she's not less of a human being or less of a person. Right. And she's not she suffered many things because she was a woman at a certain time and place, but I don't think, she was this amazing person who really inspires me. And so, so she's the inspiration for Halima. And I think that seeing, I didn't really have a Saudi American literature to look to, right?
You may be the third or fourth, by the way.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
Right. So I looked to people and places as sort of my inspiration, as sort of the thing on which I'm building my own tradition. So, and if you think about it, that's almost kind of freeing to kind of start to think about it in that way, and stop trying to think about how is somebody going to read this. But I do also I want readers to start reading differently too, to start trying to step away from the center when you're reading a book from a different experience from yours. And that's most of the time, right?
Yeah, of course.
And to try to think about why is the writer making these choices, and what are they telling me about the lives of these people? And I think that there are, I've had people asking me about Saida and saying, well, she's probably the person that, readers will most identify with. And it's well, why do you think that particular character? let's, examine that.
Right.
And maybe somebody else would identify. Why would everybody identify with her? But also, like, why does the person who I guess people see as the most sort of Americanized or
Rebellious type of, yeah,
rebellious,
right.
why is that the person that you think, people will most gravitate towards? Why not the grandma? Because we all have grandmas.
Right. Absolutely. Who are strong women. Absolutely.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And
Right.
maybe your grandma wasn't illiterate like mine, but like, why not there's just like, I feel like there's something in different characters for people to identify with, but I also don't think identification or like is the real goal of reading anyways,
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about the newscaster that you talked about. They're really and even in most of the publishing industry, and the American media and Western media in general, there's a really definitive outline of what Saudi culture is like. Women are oppressed. That's it.
Right.
And I think that what you do so well in the book, you're not actually trying to say that no, Saudi culture is so liberal and you all just have it wrong. And you're not doing any of that, because I think, what really grates with me on my nerves sometimes is when, like that newscaster, when Arab women are told that there are problems in their culture.
Right.
As if someone needs to tell us that, right?
Right.
We get it. But certainly Arabs don't have a monopoly on patriarchy and misogyny, right? Like lots of cultures. American, I mean, I think about the honor killing fetish that people have, like this thing about honor killings. And I think to myself, most American women who are murdered by a family member or a spouse or a partner.
Right.
So it's actually more that domestic violence is a problem for women all over the world. It's not that there is something in Arab culture that's different. It's the same problem. And if we could drop the pretense of there being some kind of problem with the culture, we could actually unify as women over these issues.
Right.
So I think in the book, in the novel, what you're doing really well is you're showing, for example, you have scenes with Saida and Saudi Arabia where, she's hiding herself and she's, trying not to be seen with the guy and all this kind of stuff. So you do all of that, but you also show that she's also a character who's distinct, like everybody is distinct. She's unique. She has her own drive, her own motivations. I think you play that very, very well. Like you honor your characters, but you also, you're not apologizing for the culture and you're not celebrating the culture in any, like you're not there to speak for anybody except for your characters, which is the mark of I think, a wonderful and talented writer.
Thank you.
We have a ton of questions, so I'm going to actually turn to the questions if that's okay. So I'm excited to see all of this. I'm not surprised, but excited to see it. So Suzanne is asking, she's saying, congratulations, Eman. And she's wondering if you could comment on why you started the story in the 1970s. Are there other historical contexts from the 70s that are significant? And why did you choose to start the narrative then?
Yeah, there were, I mean, part of it is like, that's the beginning of my life. And so I feel like a lot of writers do that, actually. That's a hidden a thing that we do. But also there was like a wave of Saudi students who were sent to America on government scholarships in the 60s and 70s. And so this is before, there's a later wave that happened of Saudi students coming to the States to study them. And then actually, I think a bigger wave that happens post 9/11 when the Saudi and American governments are trying to kind of reconcile. And so there was this huge government scholarship program. But my dad came on a government scholarship. He actually studied in several places. And there were, he had these friends when I was growing up who had also studied abroad. And a number of family members of mine, my dad's brothers, also studied in the States, either full programs or some people also came just for training and stuff like that. So that's why I said it then. I think there were some Saudis who came to the States to study before that, but that was sort of the first big wave.
Okay.
This is, yeah. So
we pick up with the marriage, and the marriage is already in trouble at that point when Munir and she are in the States as students. And okay, wonderful. That's great. We have another question. I'm going to combine two questions from Pete and Sahar. They're similar questions. So jumping off of Anne Lamott's quote about writing a novel being like driving a car at night, and for the rest of the audience, there's this famous quote about when you're writing a novel, it's like driving a car at night. You only can see as far as the headlights are showing you, and you just kind of make your way through it that way. That's a terrible paraphrase of poor Anne Lamott. I'm sorry, Anne Lamott, but so they're saying they're curious about what particular details, either character or plot, what surprised you on the road as you were writing this novel?
One thing that really surprised me was the ending. So I originally ended it. There was a whole nother like section that takes you to Turkey and and
oh, interesting. That's interesting to know.
Right. And it was actually originally in the point of view of a first person plural, third person or first person plural, I don't remember anymore, from the point of view of this whole family. And my editor, Maisie Cochran, who's amazing, was like, I think it can end sooner. And so the reason it ends where it ends now is because of her, and I love it. I mean, I think it just sort of opened up some meanings that were already there, but that I hadn't quite gotten to. And that was one thing that surprised me.
Great. Yeah. That's interesting to know. I always wonder, like, books that I enjoy and that I love, what was the original ending? Because I think I've heard a lot of people say that they decided to change the ending, or sometimes the characters just take over, right? And they determine their own ending. We have a question from Andrea, which is more about your process and the history of this book. How long have you been working on developing this novel? Did the personal story you mentioned, did it inspire you to write the novel right away, or has this been simmering in the back of your mind for a long time?
Yeah, yes and yes. So I started working on it right away, and I wrote started a very different novel, and then I set it aside and I wrote another novel. And then I came back to this one and I started from scratch. Okay. And then when I started from scratch, I really get into structure, but often the structure that I start out with is not the structure that I end up with, which is problematic, but for my process, I'm working on that for the next one. But I was inspired by books like A Visit from the Goon Squad. And,
Jennifer Egan, yeah.
Yeah, and even it wasn't out yet, but Homegoing has kind of a structure like this where it's like you jump in. Well, Homegoing really jumps in time, but Visit from the Goon Squad is like each chapter is like a different character, and so I had many points of view, and through the course of drafts and revision, that got cut down to just the 3 points of view. So it took a while to kind of get there, and but I think that by writing all those different points of view, I was able to kind of infuse all the different characters into the story. Even I got to know them really well.
And what is your writing process? Because you work, you have a family. How do you write, and when do you write? This is more of like a a selfish question because I want to know. Uh,
Well, I know, Susan, you're an early morning writer, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I can't do that.
I'm in the 5 a.m. writers. There's a Twitter hashtag 5 a.m. writers club. Like we
Yeah,
all hop on at 5 a.m. and log in, I guess. Yeah.
right. And
Mhm.
the 11 p.m. writers think you're crazy and you're thinking
Yes. Right.
crazy, right? Yeah.
Right. Right.
I'm it depends actually, but a lot of times I'm an after work writer, which is
Okay.
not actually my best time to write, but I prefer writing in the morning before you have the rest of your day. And
Yeah.
so actually for a while when I was in a revision phase and I was riding the metro to DC for work, I would work on my phone in the morning because that was when I had time and I had like a good half hour on the train, and revision is, easier,
Yeah.
a little bit easier in that way than writing fresh. But I've also done things like, cut down my hours so I can have a day a week to write, or take, a week off so that I can get some writing done. And it's sort of figuring out what works for right now, depending on what else is happening in my life.
So looking for those blocks of time once in a while. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
We have a question from Jeffrey, which is what writers influence and interest you? Who are some people that you've read or been taught by? You mentioned Jennifer Egan, and what kinds of literature also influences you and excites you?
Well, my all-time favorite writer is Michael Ondaatje.
Oh,
I'm
wow. Yeah.
a big fan.
Yeah.
More recently, I mean, I really love books by transnational writers, so writers who are writing about more than one country or culture. I'm trying to think right now of particular ones. I reread Beloved by Toni Morrison recently, and of
Mm,
course,
mm,
a lot of writers are influenced by her. But I think also like nonfiction writers influence me, like Claudia Rankine,
yeah.
and who else?
Yeah.
Um,
Toni Morrison is one of my favorites as well. In fact, when she passed away recently, I started rereading all the novels.
I would like to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes if I'm not reading, I'm writing, and I feel like that counts, like that's part of the
Yeah.
process.
Teju Cole is another one that I
Yeah.
have enjoyed in recent years. He writes about Nigeria and America.
Yeah. That's great. Um, okay, so we have a lot more questions. So I'm going to try to get to everybody's question. Don't be upset if I don't get to your question. Um,
I'll go faster.
speak fast. Um, so Jen is asking, what is the one thing that you're hoping a reader takes away from the book? If there was one thing readers would be left with, what would you like it to be?
Um, wow, that's a hard question.
That's a hard question. Do you want me to come back to it?
No, I think I can answer it. I mean, I don't know if there's one thing. I think I have said before, or thought before, that the trauma of parental abduction is something that I think a lot of people don't understand, and I would like them to take away. But there's probably lots of other things that I would love for them to take away. Something that someone said about the book is that um, it's sort of, I think I want to talk about the way that the book approaches place, and
Yeah.
that the book takes care with every place that it writes about. And
Yeah.
that's really important to me, because I think that I feel like I approached places like characters, that I wanted them to be well-rounded and nuanced. And,
Yeah.
I feel like I can find something to like, find something interesting about any place that I go to. And
Yeah.
so I would love for people to read the book and kind of think about places that, that they love or have a complicated relationship with, and kind of bring that their own background to reading about the places in the book.
And you move so seamlessly between Saudi and the States. And I think readers might come to the book thinking this is a very binary kind of novel where, we're going to just see very different cultures. We're going to see so many contrasts between the two cultures. And of course, we do see that, but I think there's a lot more blending than I anticipated reading about. Like, for example, the strong mother figure in Saudi, she could have been lifted from the United States, like the nervous teenagers, the back and, all of those characters are characters that we recognize, right? They're just dressed differently, or they're speaking a different language.
Yeah.
So I think you did a really good job with that. Okay, a question from Leslie. Hi, Leslie. How has the pandemic affected your writing life? Back to the writing life question.
I think
It's been
so.
hard.
I'm not writing on the Metro anymore. There's that. Over the summer, I revised an old manuscript. If that's the Leslie I think it is, she knows that manuscript. And
okay. This is Leslie Petersik, the writer. Yep.
Yeah. Leslie knows that other manuscript. It's very different now. And I worked on rewriting that over the summer. So I was, working in the evening where I see her note. Working over the summer, in the evening, or I was like taking some time off to do like summer camp for my kids. And so when they didn't want to hang out with me, I was writing. But right now I'm taking a bit of a break for the book to come out and focus on that. I do want to get back to writing, and I think that, one would hope that without a commute every day, that there's more time for writing. So.
Yeah, I hope so too. Go ahead.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Stephanie has a really good question, which is there any significance to your characters' names? How did you pick their names?
Yeah, I always, especially with Arabic names,
Yeah.
Because they often have a meaning. Like, I can't help myself. I want to pick names that that are meaningful. So Saida means happy, which she's not.
Yeah, she's not.
Munir means, like
very
lit.
Charles Dickens of you.
Right. Right. And Hanadi is just a name that could easily be changed into an English name. So
right, she becomes Hannah. Right.
Hannah. And the other names, just those three that I put the most care into. The other ones, I don't think I took as much. I just picked names that I liked.
Yeah. Okay, there are still a bunch of questions, so I'm trying to get to all of them. Oh, Pete is asking, what happened to the first novel that this one replaced? Is there a chance that we're gonna see it at some point? Are you still working on it?
Inshallah. It's on submission, so.
Oh, inshallah. Okay, that's great. Oh, I'm excited to hear that. Good question, Pete. And there was another question related to that. I'm combining questions here. Okay, so Danny is asking, Danny says, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but were you involved in the cover art selection? And if so, how did you decide? I love this cover.
It's beautiful, right?
It is gorgeous. It's lovely.
I did not select the art, but the wonderful cover designers at Tin House did, and I had input.
Hanadi Abdullah saying, glad to see my name in a book. Alhamdulillah. We love seeing it too.
Yeah.
I love seeing people.
I gave input. I gave them some things to use as like inspiration and sent them like Saudi art and stuff. But they picked this, and it does evoke sort of.
I love how her face is rising up, and from it's beautiful. Yeah. And what about the title? Someone is asking about the title of the book. Like, did you were there other titles in consideration?
I can't remember when it became Bride of the Sea, but it's been Bride of the Sea for a long time. And I was really excited that Tin House loved the title too, so we didn't have to go through that process of picking a title. Bride of the Sea is the nickname for Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which is a port on the Red Sea. So that's where it came from.
Okay, great. And this will have to be the final question. I'm sorry, everyone, but this comes from Sherry, and you've touched upon this a little bit in your responses to other questions, but Sherry is saying, I'm so excited to read this novel. I was also wondering about what I said about characters surprising you. So did your characters do things that you did not expect during the course of this, of writing it? Or did you have a clear idea from the beginning of who they were, what their motivations were, and what they were going to do throughout the novel? Did anything dramatically or drastically change from the plot as you had imagined it?
Yeah, I mean, the way I write is I don't usually know like the plot when I start out. I know some aspects, and I do like to figure out like a kind of a structure. But no, they really kind of became who they were through the process of writing.
Okay.
I don't know if they like surprised me. It's not that I knew what was gonna happen, but
So it really was the Anne Lamott method, like you really just kind of made
yeah.
your way. And how many drafts would you say you went through?
um
I always ask writers this question because the answer always surprises me.
I'm not really a like multiple draft person. I'm more of a like iterate as you go along, but there were at least 2 or 3 actual drafts. But for the most part, like that first draft is probably the equivalent of some writers like 7 drafts.
Okay.
Like it's just go back and do it again, go back and do it again, go back and do it again. Like
Right. Okay. So you were really just careful the whole way through as you went through. So your first draft was really like pretty tightly put together, you would say.
yeah, but then I did do 2 more revisions that were pretty substantive after that. But like I think at that point the characters were there, the settings there, like all of that is there.
That's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations. This is such a
Thank you
remarkable
so much,
novel. I
Susan.
encourage everyone to read it. And I just, I really feel so excited about the contribution you're making, not just to books about immigration, about Arab Americans, but just about family life and marriage. And there's just so much here. And I thank you for giving us these characters. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thanks to everyone for coming, and to Politics and Prose for hosting, and to Tin House. And this has been really fun.
Thank you both for this wonderful conversation tonight. I always love to end with a question. We've probably talked about it a little bit, but is there anything that you both are reading right now or excited to read coming up?
Do you want to go first, Susan?
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. You go
Okay.
first. Yeah.
I'll go. I'm reading You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat, a Palestinian American novel. It's really good. I just started, but it's really good.
I have been on a Billie Holiday kick for about a month now. So I am reading a biography of Billie Holiday, which I am loving. Yeah. And I've been listening to a lot of her music. And so officially in a Billie Holiday phase. That's where I am right now. But the most recent biography of her life is really quite excellent.
Cool.
I love that. I'm going to add both of those to my list.
Yeah.
So thank you both so much. And this concludes tonight's event. I wanted to remind all of our viewers that an event like this is really possible with support from you. Book sales are really what helps us put programming like this on. So if you loved hearing what Eman had to say, please pick up this book. As someone who read it and was wholeheartedly obsessed with it, you will not regret it. And also check out our website. We have our upcoming events posted there, so you can always pre-order your books and check us out again soon. Thank you again to everyone. Good night. Stay
Thank
safe,
you.
stay
Stay
well.